Okay, guys, we got to get back at it. Stay with me. Again, this shit will change your life. It will make you the retoucher not even just a retoucher, it'll make you the photographer you want to be. It will do all sorts of things. So we're going to, today, hopefully, it will be an eye-opener, because otherwise I'm teaching you shit you already know, and there's no reason to be here if you're going to do that. But everybody's here. All 16 of you guys came back. I can tell you how happy that makes me, and how, again, if you can keep this up, this hopefully will make a difference. Okay, the problem. So RGB, CMY, HSB, all are derived from RGB. So HSB is all, they take an RGB image and they do a series of formulas to suck out basically the values for HSB. HSB does not start on its own. You wouldn't ever have a camera that would actually shoot native in HSB. Consequently, they have all the same exact limitations. And here's the trick. This is the biggest rub about trying to deal with color managed workflow or color just in general. Every device, every eye, every sensor, every monitor, every printer, everything that deals with color has its own unique definition of color. To the point that your eyes, you would think, well, both of them see color the same way. That's actually not true. Your eyes actually are independent of one another. We call this device dependence color. It basically means that whatever it is that is actually observing the color is actually causing a problem. There is a derivation from what would be considered, possibly be considered the normal color, or a color, right? And the thing is that people got together and they realized that, well, there is no one definition of color. So how do we deal with this whole problem of being able to translate color? How do I say to you, okay, I want to give you this red, and you see it as the same red that I'm trying to give to you? Or the same thing in a printer. How do you actually translate what you see on a screen to a printer and have the results that you expect? How do you get the color on your printer to match the color on your screen if both of them have their own unique definition of what that color is, right? So there was a group of people who got together in the 1930s. So anyway, there's an infinite number of these trisimultaneous color spaces. Again, if you think about I don't know how many billions of people live on the earth, you know, every one of those eyeballs independently is looking at color slightly differently. The number of monitors, cameras, printers, whatever, it just goes on and on and on. Infinite number in here. It's relatively easy to convert from one to another, but you need a base. You need what we call a standard base to actually work from. So anyway, RGB values that produce the exact color that you desire on one device will produce something different on another device, and that's the problem. That is not color managed workflow, right? So you see it on your monitor, you get what you want on your monitor, and then you go to print it out, whatever, and it's looking all like your monitor. That's the problem that we're trying to get with here. RGB values are monitor dependent. HSB values are also monitor dependent. CMYK values are printer dependent. So how did they fix this problem? There was a group that got together, and they got together in Paris, so they only speak in French. They only, all the terms, the names, and all that kind of stuff for them are in French, and I don't. So anyway, it's basically, we translate it as the International Color Consortium. So how many people have ever seen ICC at the end of a profile? It's because it comes from the International Color Consortium. So a bunch of guys, probably a few women as well, got together in the 30s in Paris, and they hammered this thing out. How do we actually get a handle on standardizing color so that we can translate it? They got together again in 1976, and they did a revision. They took what they'd learned over 40 years and they revised it, but there weren't really major wholesale changes. So they came up with a couple of things, and these things are just important to understand, because then you'll understand what it is we're trying to ultimately go for here. They came up with what they call the standard observer, and what they did is it represents the color perception that the average human person would have. They tested like thousands of people, and they averaged it all together, and they came up with this one definition of color. Now, it's not specific to any one person. This is an artificial person. But the advantage of it is that it's a mathematical person. It never changes. The standard observer's eyes never get old. They never die. They never go away. By definition, there is this value that they see in color. And then what we do is we measure all of our devices against the standard observer. And we can then standardize our color. And you're going to see that process happen. So if I've lost you right now, don't worry, hopefully I'll get you back. It was based on color matching experiences. We don't care about this. So here it is in a nutshell. This is the process that we're going to do for your cameras, your monitors, and your printers. We can't change the color in your eyes. I'm sorry, that's not, or at least not yet. So anyway, if you take a file that has this color in it, so this is a file, this is the color, and this is actually its location. Again, I'm referring to these numbers as location, but you can consider them the values of RGB. So you can actually plug this into, if you want to look at the very same color, click on your color, the color picker, the foreground or background color picker, whatever, and type in 255 red, 148 green, and 21 blue, and you get this color right here. And you can anticipate this color in some ways. You can say, okay, well, it's got a lot of red in it. I don't know that I would anticipate it as much red, but it's got a medium green in it, which probably gets somewhat neutralized out, but it's really deficient in blue. And because yellow is the complement of blue, if you're lacking blue, your image is showing you yellow, and that's why this has got kind of that yellowish color to it. Make sense? Not that this really matters. It's just again, keep you familiar with this. So this is the color that your file is actually asking for. If you were to look at the numbers, which we can do now because you've got an info palette in Photoshop, this is actually the color that you would measure out. And if you were working in a completely controlled color managed workflow, whatever, it's also the color you would see. However, when you look at your monitor, this is the color you see. You see a completely different yellow. And this is the problem. What your monitor is showing you, the reds are the same, the value of red, but there's a whole lot more green than your monitor is showing you than the file is actually asking for. The monitor is actually showing you a 248 green, and the truth of it is your computer, the file's only asking for a 148 green. So this is that mismatch. This is the discrepancy that actually happens. This is the derivation, is the way they'll actually phrase it. And then if we take a look down at the blue, you can see you have twice as much blue in the monitor version than the file is actually asking for. So we have a problem, and this is the fundamental problem. So what can we do about that? We calibrate our monitor and we create a profile. So what happens when you calibrate a monitor, this is a monitor calibrator right here. We're actually going to go through the process of doing this. It looks like this. It's a puck that's actually got a lens in it and software that goes with it. And what you do is you plug this thing into your computer, you stick this thing on your monitor, and the software starts showing colors. It starts putting out color on your monitor, and this thing measures it. This is a spectrometer. It actually is measuring wavelengths, so it's a pure measurement of color, non-device dependent. And what it does is it says, okay, in this case, it says, okay, well, the file's asking for 255 red, and we're giving it 255 red. Things are fine. But now in this case, it's asking for 148 green, and it's giving it 248. There's a problem here. We need to solve that problem, and that problem is solved by the profile that this thing builds. So what it does is, again, the software shows it hundreds, if not thousands, of colors. This thing measures it, and it builds a table. Where were the colors right that were asked for, but where are the colors off, and how much are they off? And it measures the derivation, and it builds this table, and you can see that in the profile right here, it understands that the file wanted 148, that the monitor is saying 248, and it understands that, okay, we need to lose 100 of this green when it's asking for this color to make it correct. And if it all goes well, if all goes well, once you have your monitor and you use the profile and the calibration that you made, your monitor will actually show you the color that your file asked for. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on here? And we do this over and over for every single thing that we actually need to manage in a color managed workflow. You're actually going to build profiles today. Are there questions about this part? So you can see that the profile said, okay, we didn't need any correction for that particular red. We needed 100 correction for this green, and we needed a 32 correction for that blue. And now the numbers that the file are asking for are actually the numbers that the monitor is showing, and the two of them look the same. It seems so simple, right? Photoshop was almost at version 6 before they even began to institute or manage any of this stuff. So profiles, what are they? So they represent the data that reproduces the characteristics of the device. So again, it's looking at that color derivation. It's created by measuring the derivation from a known standard, and the profiles adjust for that derivation. And then the profile transformation, this fixing of color, for lack of a better way of putting it, actually happens in what they call a color conversion space, and those are inside of Photoshop, and we all know them well. They are Adobe RGB, sRGB, all of those are mathematical spaces. They're not real, they're not device dependent, they are all mathematical models. And the advantage of that is that if I get a file to look right on my monitor that's color calibrated in a color managed workflow, and I give it to any of you, and you've got a color managed workflow for your monitor, what you end up seeing on your monitor is exactly what I gave to you. But what allowed that to happen is that I'm giving you, it comes out in Adobe RGB for me, which is a mathematical space. I give it to you in Adobe RGB, and you open it up in that same mathematical space. So the space that this is coming from both of us is the same. This will make sense in just a little bit when we see it. So that's working spaces. So this is how it all works. This is the holy grail, and the way you're going to work in this class, and I hope the way you work for the whole rest of your life. If we start at the beginning of this, on this left side over here, we're actually either going to, you can have an input that's either a camera or a scanner. You can do this for scanners as well. You can profile scanners. But basically, you've got a camera here, and the camera is device dependent. It's got a bias. You actually profile your camera, and when you actually run this through the profile into your input software, so this would be Lightroom or Camera Raw or all the Capture One if you're using Capture One, all that kind of stuff, whatever, is it comes into here, it actually makes that transition, and then it brings into Adobe Photoshop. And in Photoshop, again, this is where Adobe RGB is, ProPhoto, sRGB, all of these are mathematical spaces. They are identical for everyone. So if I can get unbiased color into this, then I can give this to anybody who's got this color space, and they will have unbiased color in that space. However, if they want to look at it, or I want to look at it on a monitor, again, if I go straight out to a monitor that has not been profiled or calibrated, that color is perverted, and I will not see the color that I actually put into Adobe RGB, and neither will anybody else who doesn't have a color managed workspace. But if you do, that profile makes the correction, and what you see is what you actually put in the beginning. And anybody who's got this set up will see that same exact color. Does that make sense? And then finally, it's for all outputs. If you want to go out to a printer, you go through a profile. And so again, this color that's been neutralized in here, or device dependent in here, because this is not a device, this is a mathematical space. That's a device, the camera is a device, this is a device, printer is a device, whatever. Again, if I'm going out to this printer, I go through via a profile. It does the color correction for me, so that what I get out of my printer is the same thing that is in here, and the same thing that I'm seeing on my monitor. Does that make sense, everyone? The trick to this, though, is that you can't, say for instance, like all of these are IMAX. You can't build one profile for this monitor and then put it on all of these. These are all device dependent. So every single one of them is unique and different. You have to profile the monitor that you're going to work on. There's no trading them, sharing them, any of that kind of stuff. If you're really crazed about your printing, you actually profile your printers on an individual basis as well. So even though those are all Canon Pro 1000s, they are not kicking out color all the same. Now, the shift that you get in color on the printers is much less of an issue than what is happening here, because the inks on printer, that's really all it's about. And the inks, they do inks now in such massive lots. The shift from one printer to another based on ink is relatively small. Make sense? Okay. Any questions about this? All right. We've already gone through that. Okie dokie. So, we're going to start with doing a monitor profile. We're going to build that first. So I've already told you about this. This is all made by X-Ray. X-Ray pretty much owns the space now. Spider is another company that does stuff on here. They call them themselves, they're now Data something, but the profiler that they make is called a Spider. I don't know really that many people who use it. This is really the standard of it. They make all sorts of versions of this. Don't be lured into getting the cheap version. They're just going after your money. They make really shitty equipment as well as making really good equipment. So Color Monkey is one of the things that these guys have made. If you have one, throw it away. Don't throw it away. Put it on eBay. Let some unsuspecting, never mind. Is that bad karma? Like if you got a really shitty piece of gear and you sell it and you know that it's really shitty, did you do something wrong?
They should have done their research.
Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. I love that, because I've done that before, and I've always felt guilty about it, and now I don't care.
Yeah.
I love that.
Google's free.
News to all of you, don't buy anything for, no. Anyway, this is an i1 this is an i1, they call it an i1 Pro display model. They also have a studio version of this. They look exactly the same, but there'll be a little different label on it. Both of those are good. The trick to though is you need to use different software. You would think it would all be the same. It's not. You can only use for the studio one, you have to use the studio software one, and for the display one, you have to use the display one. And good luck trying to find that. So here's the deal. You can check these out from the Media Center right downstairs. You can actually, you'll see the time it takes to profile the monitors, even at the most intense versions of it, is about 10 minutes. So it's not that big of a deal. You can actually do it down there. You can check it out and hand it right back to them and leave, right? So that's a possibility. They have the software that you need for either the studio version of this or the display version of this. At the photo studio right now, they have one of these. It's only the studio model, so just make sure that you're using the studio version of the software to do it. And they too have a little thumb drive that when you check this out, there's a little thumb drive that's got it in there. When you load the software, if it says, do you want to update this first, I would go ahead and update it to the latest version, but you do not want to track this. If you go online right now and do a search for i1 Display Profile software, good luck. Who knows where you'll end up. You'll never be able to find this shit. Wacom is the same way. Wacom tablets, trying to find the software, the drivers for their stuff. That's why I give it all to you guys. It only took me a year to find it. Not really that bad. Okay, the question about this part, so anyway, you load the software, you run it, you plug this guy in, and it will walk you through it. Piece of advice. If you don't have this thing plugged in before you start the software, it may have changed now with updated versions of it, but at least in the past, you went to the entire process of it and got to the end to save your profile, and the program would lock up. So you want this thing plugged in before you actually launch the software. Make sense? All right. So I'm going to launch mine. The tricky thing about this is that you're going to see what happens on the screen, and you'll certainly see it in the video recording. What you'll never see, though, is the results, because, well, actually on the video recording you will see the results, but you won't see the results on this projector because the software would want to actually profile the projector, which you can do. You can profile projectors, monitors, scanners, cameras, pretty much anything you think of you can probably profile. So at any rate, to use this software, you come up to your application folder. This is i1 Profiler right here. Mine is actually now, plugged in. You'll see that there's two applications here. There's Profiler Tray, nobody uses that. There's Profiler App, that's what everybody uses. Simply double click on it and say OK. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'd started this recording. Okay, when you get to this part, and it says install update, I would do that, but we're not going to do that today just in the course of time, but I would go ahead and update this stuff. So you have options to start with. You can do a display profiling, a projector, a printer, or a scanner. In our case, this little puck right here will only do displays and projectors. It will not do printers. There's a different scanner for that. They also have that down in the digital print lab. When we get closer more towards the later part of the semester, I will show you guys print profiling. It's pretty straightforward. So if you do want to make an individual profile of a paper on any one of those printers in there, there's this hardware and software both to do that here. So at any rate, there's also a basic and advanced button over here. I'm going to strongly suggest you guys start out with the basic part of this. Click on display profile, and this window opens up. Now in my case, I've got two options here at the top. You will not have that. I've got two options because one of them is my computer monitor. The other is this projector up here because it's connected. I would have to disconnect the projector to get rid of this, which you guys don't want to do, so I'm not going to do that. So then in the phosphors, these are the things that actually drive the monitor. Leave them at their default. Do not change this. There's a lot of people who would say, oh, you need to actually change this to OLED, that kind of stuff. If you were doing some weird off, giant TV screen, something like that, you might actually use this, but otherwise you do not use this part right here. In the white point drop-down menu right here, you've got possibilities right here. You've got canned ones, D50, D55, D65, and D75. What do any of those Ds mean? They stand for daylight. And what's the 6500 mean, or the 65? I just gave it away. It is the color temperature in Kelvin that is neutral. So what we are using this puck to do, and this profile, and this calibration process, is to calibrate our monitors. The first step is to get rid of any color cast. And so that's what's actually going to happen here. We're going to set it to D65, and everybody uses D65. I don't care what monitor you're using right now. There are very specialized applications where people will actually change this for a very specific reason. That is not this class. Okay. The next thing down, luminance. Now I'm going to click this drop-down menu. You will see that there's canned versions of this. The default on this is 120 candelas per square meter. All this is the brightness of your monitor. That's all it is. So this question came up last week. What controls the black point of your monitor? The environment, right? Remember how dark the room is? If you guys go out into the digital print lab for the first time in the history of the digital print lab, it's actually set at the right level right now. That's why all the lights are out. So that the image that's on your screen is actually, the black of it is controlled by how light or dark the room is. The white point, how bright it is controlled by the brightness of your monitor. Those are the two things that control the dynamic range of your apparent image on your monitor. Does that make sense? So we're going to go through all the steps to do all of this, but if you take your whole calibrated monitor thing and you go out and you hang out on the patio with a bright sunny day, good luck. Your tonal range is completely off. There's no way you can judge it. Number one, you won't be able to see it because your monitor will be too dark, so you crank the brightness up on your monitor and then all goes to hell. You've gotten rid of your black point and your white point both. Make sense? This is all about consistency. It's all about eliminating those variables, and this is one of them. I personally, after doing a ton of work, find that 140 is a closer number, so 140 candelas per square meter. Again, that's just the brightness measure. Don't get all caught up in the candela part of it all. But again, so when I go to target this thing, it's going to measure it. I'm actually going to set it between those two values. Make sense? Okay. As we come down here, the tonal response, you'll see that this is set at a gamma of 2.2. What's going on here is that monitors and digital cameras, all that kind of stuff, they're all linear devices, and we live in a logarithmic world. And without getting into all of that, you guys basically know that when you talk about f-stops, that the difference in one f-stop and the one right next to it is either a doubling or halving of light, right? So if we go from 5/6 to f8, we're stopping down, we cut the light in half. If we go from 8 to 11, we cut it in half again. If we go from 5/6 to 4, we actually are opening up, we double the light. It's all this doubling and halving, right? That's a logarithmic scale, and that's how our eyes see, that's how film sees, but that's not how a digital camera or a monitor sees. These guys see linear. So the difference in here is you go from 1 to 2 is the same as from 6 to 7, is the same from 101 to 102, whatever. It's a linear scale. It's not this doubling and halving thing. We need to make that translation from a linear scale to a logarithmic one, and that's what this curve is all about. The default is always 2.2. Old school in the Macintosh world forever, a long time ago, was set to 1.8. It was made for a less contrasted image, but it was for people who were really trying to match really shitty newsprint. That's not what we're trying to do here. 2.2 is your target goal, and it's going to be by default, so you don't need to fuck with this if you don't go in there and screw anything up. However, the next thing down, ambient light control, and it says adjust the monitor based on the ambient light. That is the last thing in the world that you want to do. You are building something to eliminate variables, and this checkbox should just read gigantic. Biggest variable you could introduce into this, right? You think that's bad. If you're on a Macintosh, do this with me. Again, if you're on Windows, I'm not certain how to do this part, but just you'll take notes here to see where this all happens. Anyway, go up to the Apple menu, come down to System Preferences. If you've got the latest, greatest, it's called System Settings, I think. So anyway, I'm going to do mine in System Preferences. There's a couple of things that we need to change in here right off the bat. The first one is you need to click on your Display Preference. And in the display part right here, sorry, sorry about that. So I'm going after my MacBook display right here. This automatically adjusts brightness. You need to make sure that's turned off, because what this thing does is exactly what that thing in the profile creation software wants to do. It wants to control the brightness of your monitor based on the ambient light in the room. So as the room gets darker, it actually makes your monitor darker to balance it for your eyes. How many of you guys have ever done this? You've been working all day, and you've been working, in the classroom and lights on, and you go home at night and you turn on your computer and it's like so fucking bright your eyes hurt? Is that happening? That's the problem we're trying to get away from, right? Is that you need to adjust your monitor to actually fit the environment that you're working in. So I'm going to tell you how to set this up to do your retouching. It doesn't mean that when you're really deep into your porn and you really want to see better that you can't turn your brightness up. You can, but you just need to remember to turn it back down when you go to retouch. I know, that's such a bad image, isn't it? So, you need to make sure that you've got this unchecked. You do not want it adjusting. True Tone, they've taken it a step further in Apple. They actually make your screen less blue at night because your eyes, everybody's talking about you now can get glasses that actually filter the blue glare that comes out of a screen. Well, Apple's actually built this in. But again, you're changing the color of your monitor. You're not changing it. Apple is changing it. Apple is using their camera to look at the room that you're in and saying, okay, it's late at night, this is the ambient light of the room, we're going to change all this, we're going to change the brightness and we're going to change the color. Well, if you do that, your color profile for your retouching is worthless. So anyway, you got to make sure that those are both off. Then you can say done to that. The next thing you need to look at is accessibility. So accessibility is right here. In accessibility on the left-hand side, you should have an icon that says displays as well. In the displays as well, you want to check this reduce transparency. So one of the cool things that Apple did, or things that Apple did, is they actually allow you to see through windows to windows that are behind it. Well, we're going to be putting color out here on this screen and measuring it, and if all of a sudden that window is transparent and it's allowing you to see through to the window behind, the color or whatever is on the window behind is going to be a part of what you're trying to measure, and that we can't do, right? So you got to have that part turned off. And then finally, this display contrast. Most people don't touch this thing, but you should definitely never touch this thing. This should be actually just at normal and nowhere else. So these are the other things that you need to set. You can close that part up right now. Then you simply click on the next arrow and it'll take you to the next screen. And this one, it's a little hard to see everything in here, but you see all these patches that are right here. So these are what the software is going to spit out onto my monitor. And my monitor is going to use this puck to measure it, and then whatever this file is asking for and whatever my monitor is showing, that discrepancy is built into a profile, and I've then got the thing that will actually remove the device dependence of my monitor. Are we good on this part? Okay. So the screen part of this is a little bit off every now and then. Again, you want to make sure that this automatically just, okay, so this one you do want to leave on. This would only change if you have a really high-end monitor. It's just how brightness is controlled. The software is going to control the brightness here, so you want to leave that checked. If you've got a very expensive high-end Aizawa monitor, something like that, whatever, you need to check to see if there's a built-in control for this actually in the monitor itself. But if you're just working on a laptop or a regular, anything that's under probably $1,000, you're not going to have this automatically display control. So this part's all correct. I'm going to click on Start Measurement, and it's going to walk you through what to do. So if you take a look at this puck, there's a weight, it's a counterweight that's on the back. It slides up and down to allow you to then drape this over the back of your monitor, and it'll hold this puck in place, right? So that's all that part is. You'll see by the little illustration here in this blinking light, there's a protective cover on this guy. You lift it, you'll see the front of this right here is white. It's a white transparent translucent disc. That's not what measures it. It's the lens underneath it. So you lift this up and it spins around, and then you will see the lens that you actually want to use to measure your screen, right? So then I've gone through all of this. So I'm going to adjust this so it leans on my screen and read what it actually says here, because this is really good advice. It says for you to tilt your monitor backwards so that it ensures that the puck is leaning against it as opposed to falling away from it. If your monitor is perfectly upright, it probably is not sitting really pretty well on that. And if your monitor is actually tilted a little forward to you, the puck will swing free from it and you won't get any measurement at all. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, yep, I get that part, and then click on Next. So it's spitting out these colors. The puck is actually measuring them, and the first thing that it comes up with is my luminance adjustment. My monitor, my target was 120 candelas. Right now it's being measured at 279. My monitor is so fucking bright, it's ridiculous. So you will see this change in real time. The problem that we have with this changing in real time, though, is the only way that you can adjust the brightness of your Macintosh is to use that silly little icons, the two on here, the big sun and the little sun. Not really as precise as we would like in this. So here's the trick. Make your monitor as bright as it will go. So my monitor now is maxed out, as bright as it can be. And you can see I'm at 532 degrees. Most of you guys are retouching at this brightness, and you are 4 times as bright as you should be on your monitor. And you think, okay, well, why isn't my image printing the way I expected it to? Why does this look so bad on Verser's computer? It looked great on mine. Make sense? So here's the trick. As you actually make changes in this, that number will remeasure. So I'm going to go down 1 click darkness, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is at 106. It's too dark. I'm going to go back up 1, 4. That gives me a candela brightness of my monitor of 143 candelas. I told you that my target was 140. But what I know is that it's 4 clicks down from the brightest on my monitor. And you've got to remember that number. Most serious people about this will put a little Post-it note or a little piece of tape on their computer and just say brightness 140 candelas is 4 clicks down from max brightness. It's just the easy. You can do it from the darkness all the way up. I mean, you can go from either end, but you're just trying to remember what that part is. There are other people who will do this. They'll go up to the brighter version of this, so this is now too bright. They will click this, and you see the number of that right there. They'll take a quick picture of that little readout on the screen to then be able to count the number of little teeth in that part. But the going from brightness down is just the easiest thing to remember, and you just put a -4 on a piece of tape on your computer, or yours is going to be different. Do not put -4 on yours. You've got to measure what yours is. I'm just telling you how to get there, right? So this part is now correct for me, so I'm going to hit next again. And now it's going to go through its deal. It goes through 3 passes of this. The first pass is it's going to actually try to calibrate my monitor. What it's trying to do right now is get to that D65, that cast, and it's also trying to get to a contrast range with the gamma. It's a curve measure of the gamma of 2.2. And again, if you don't know what that means, it's just the shape of the curve. That's all they're trying to do. And the higher the gamma, the steeper the curve is, the greater your contrast is. But it's trying to, again, make the adjustment of how monitors work and how your eyeballs see. Yes?
When you fix, like, when you went, like, 4 steps down, when it goes to the next, like, thing of colors, do you put the brightness back up?
No, you leave it right where it is. And anytime you want to work with this monitor, anytime you want to work with this using this guy, you need to do your 4 clicks down. But it's probably way too ambitious to assume that you're going to leave it at that brightness for the whole rest of your life, or no matter what you're doing. You're not, because you'll be frustrated. You'll get out and you'll be in really bright light and you won't be able to see anything, and you'll just get it's unrealistic. So it's just a quick way to say, when do I need to, so when do you actually need to put this into effect? I leave the profile on the whole time. I reset the brightness when I'm doing serious color correction. How often do you need to do this part? So I tell everybody this, and this is true. If you work for, you guys know what Pixar is, right? Walt Disney Company. I don't even know if they're Walt Disney. Yeah, they're part. I don't even know if they're still Pixar, but Steve Jobs, animation company, Toy Story, all that kind of stuff, right? If you work for Pixar and you don't calibrate your monitor in the morning, and I mean every morning, you're automatically fired. There's no question. There's no bringing it up. There's no let's talk about it. No, I forgot. No mistake. Whatever. Fired automatically. Why is that? Well, anybody here know anything about rendering images for video? It takes forever to do that. So when they build a film for Disney, it'll go from station to station to station to station, depending on people doing different things. Oh, I'm color grading. I'm doing the background color. Oh, I'm doing this one character. So it's passed around a lot. If you ultimately get onto a computer that does not have that master thing that you're working on in a calibrated space, and it gets perverted and nobody picks up on it, then after all the work, after all the millions of hours that they spend actually making the movie, it goes to a rendering farm. And the rendering farm is nothing but, it's buildings larger than the student center that are full of nothing but computers and fans to keep them cool. And the thing renders. It's just massive, massive, massive amount of data compiling. And all of a sudden, so then they get the final product and they realize that there's something wrong. And they track it down to, oh, that was Verser when he was working on that background color. He was in the wrong profile space to do that, blah, 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 perverted all the color. And it cost them millions and millions of dollars in rendering time and all the work that everybody else put in, whatever. They just don't tolerate it. They do not tolerate it. They don't ask for it. It's just understood that if you don't do it, you're fired. So at any rate, so it goes through the first pass here to try to get rid of the color cast. So it's trying to achieve D65 and a contrast of 2.2, a gamma of 2.2. The second round that it goes through is actually to do that whole measuring part, the thing that we looked at. It's spitting out color, it's measuring the color, and it's looking for the derivation, and it's building a table that lists all the derivatives of that. Oh, this was too red, or that was not enough blue, or whatever all of that is. It builds that whole table. It then loads that whole table, and then it runs it again to make sure that this actually worked. So we've gone through all 3 of those steps, and it's now telling you we're done, and we're going to pick up this little puck, and we're going to change it back, set it down, and then go to the next. And it's going to say the measurement was successful, and I click next to get to the next step. And I'm going to say, well, maybe I have to click OK first. Take a look at this right now. The colors that are on top are the colors that were asked for. The colors underneath it were the colors that my monitor showed it in an uncalibrated state. How the fuck can you actually do color correction if your monitor lies to you this badly? Look at the difference. Look at this. this is the color that the file wants. This is what my monitor just showed it. And you're looking at it going, oh my God, that purple isn't saturated enough. And you crank the fucking saturation and it was never your file. That's not what's wrong. It's your monitor. Is this extreme? This should be the wake-up call to everybody, and nobody wants to deal with this stuff, but this is your reality. So, back to my question, how often do you have to profile? I profile usually once a month, but anytime I am doing critical color correction, I profile that morning. If I'm doing a week of critical color correction, I'm profiling every single day. How much do you care about your work? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hit next. You need to actually give your profile a meaningful name, and color LCD with the date is not the meaningful name to give it. I'm actually going to call this MacBook Pro. With my initials. That is the date that's already put in here, and I'm fine with that part of it all. And so I'm going to go ahead and say Save Profile. Says it worked successfully. That's what you want to hear. I'm going to then quit this, and I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. So you guys, let me see what I can do right here. Yeah. You need to scooch back a little bit because I'm going to show everybody. You can't see this on the screen. This is what I was just telling you guys. You cannot see this. I've got to show you my screen. So hang on one second. Let me get an image up on my screen. I'm going to go back to the car. You guys are going to get really tired of seeing this car. All right, can you guys all see my screen? Hang on. First, sir, how did you ruin that brand new computer? No, it's not a brand new computer. What happened? It fell. Okay, so everybody's just getting a place where you can sort of see what's going on here. So I'm going to go up to my system preferences again. I'm going to go to displays again. I'm going to click on, this is my MacBook Pro one right here, on my display settings, I think. My MacBook Pro, optimized for, they've changed all of this, so sorry guys. Where are you? You have set up scale. It'll actually, yeah, you have to go to the scaled version. So this is all the auto shit that they've got on here. The scaled version, this is the one profile that I just made. So I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit so you can sort of see what happens to the car. This is what Apple ships with. Actually, they've removed Apple, what they normally ship with. So I think it's going to be this Recton. Look at the difference. Look at the white of my image right here. Watch when this changes. You can see it easier in the white part. Oh, here. This is where it is. This is what Apple ships with, is this right here. So you can see this part, and this is the profile that I just made. Look at, did you see how much warmer that got? The massive amount of yellow got pumped into there, or actually it's really not yellow. It's the color casting. The biggest culprit right here is that white point. It's going from that 9,500 degrees Kelvin that Apple ships with to 6,500 degrees Kelvin, which is considerably warmer, but this is now neutral color. Are we good on this? Guys, you cannot do this work. You simply cannot do it unless you are working in a calibrated monitor setup. It's impossible to do. You're just guessing. Are there questions about any of this? All right. I'm going to hit done to get out of there. I'm going to get out of that part.
Can you say you just check out those on floor 4?
Yeah, and actually, you can take them home. You don't have to do it right there. I said, I mean, you see how long that took. It goes really quick. You come 10 minutes early and you just run down there really quickly, or, you make the reservation, whatever, and you just bang it out and you're done and you're good until the next time, right? But you can also, they're set up, you can take them home for like 2 or 3 days. So if you've got a monitor at home or something else, or you didn't bring your whatever, blah, blah, you can actually take them home for a few days and you'll be fine. But this is a must. Okay, so what I've done really quickly, because then we are actually going to do another one right now. All of us are going to do this, and it's not going to be our monitors. Where are you? There you are. So what we have just done now is we have created this monitor profile right here. We calibrated it, it's a bonus, but we've also built this profile. So now any image that I've actually got in Adobe Photoshop that has actually been neutralized, if the color in here is correct, then going out to this profile will be correct. If I give this file to any of you and you have got a calibrated monitor, when yours actually comes out, when the image information comes out of your Adobe RGB or your ProPhoto RGB, whatever, to your monitor, it will not only be correct, it will be the same as mine. And if we put our monitors next to one another, you would see the same file in the same color. Huge, right? Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to actually make the input profile for your camera. How many people in this room have ever profiled their camera? Right? You guys, how many people in here are seniors? Yeah, getting ready to graduate soon, right? It's gotten, you've been 4 years shooting in the dark, right? Finally now, well, at least finally now, right? You found me and I'm going to change it. All right, so to do that, okay, did everybody download the software that I asked, the color calibration software, and load it? Again, if you're working on one of the iMacs that's actually here, you've already got it on there. If you're not, just really quickly, again, if we go back to our session 2, so again, if you've got a machine at home, go ahead and do this at home, whatever as well. You're loading, if you're on Windows, you're loading the camera calibration setup.exe. If you're on Macintosh, it's the color checker camera calibration software package. But again, the computers that are right here should have the software already on it, and we're going to find out right now. So to use this, go to your application folder. Again, they will be named slightly different. So if you're on Windows, it will be called camera calibration. If you're on Mac, it'll be called color calibration. It's the exact same software. It's just on different different platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and start up my Macintosh one. You do not need a puck to do this. All you really need is a color card to do this. But before I do that color card, again, this is not something that you'll see on the video. You will hear this, but you won't see this on the video. I need everybody to come back here and take a look at this on this board back here. So stand up, come back here as a group. Wow, oh, geez, am I that blind? It's just that few of them, right? Okay, I need everybody to come up here and take a look at this thing really quick. Let me explain to you what it is first. So this is a synthetic file that I've actually built and then printed out. This is a glossy paper that I printed on some Epson printer. I don't really remember what it is. So you would probably want to do this if you've got a paper that you really love and a printer that you really love. You would probably want to do this same process just to make yours more hyper-specific, but you can use the values that I've pulled off of this or that you see off of this, and you'll be fine. Okay, so basically what it is, it's easier to see here in the lighter areas. There is a light gray that gets lighter, all the way up to white. And the values of that gray are right underneath it. So this gray right here, the gray background right here is a 234, 234, 234. Remember, if all three of your RGB values are identical, you have a neutral gray. So, and then all the way up here, 255, 255, 255, all of them, and that's why we have page white. Make sense? So that's just the values here. On the black version here, it's the same thing. We start with 000, and then we go to a 333 and a 666 and a 999. And that's actually going up. So it's just, there's step ramps. That's all that's going up here, right? Does that make sense to everybody, what's going on, the construct of this? Then on the black ones, there is the letter V that's pure black in all of them. And then the white ones, there's a white V, and it's pure white in all of them. And what we're trying to do now is establish where do we really find highlight detail and where do we really find shadow detail. That's what this whole chart's about. So what I need everybody to do is come close, and I need you to actually start to look at this bottom part first. And what I need you to do is you want to look and pick out the patch value, the background value that really separates from the V. You're not looking for, just barely, because you can see if you were on a really heavy light up here and you come in like this, whatever, you can probably pick the V difference. That is not shadow detail. Shadow detail is detail. So what value of this background, so again, this is 03 all the way up to 21, this is 24, 27, 31, all of it, where do you really see the V?
234.
I'm sorry, what?
I think 234.
No, that's the white version. We're going to do the black first, then we're going to go to the white. So in the black version right here, where do you really see the V? Point at it. If you don't know how to, just point, grab one. Just
45.
45, well, you certainly see it there, but you don't see it at 42?
I would say like 30 or 33.
So a 30 or 33?
It's like the bottom line of it.
30, I'm sorry, what?
Like the bottom line of it.
Oh, it's certainly the bottom line, but do you see it here?
Yeah.
A little, but that's not really shadow detail, right? For me anyway, I'm picking it up somewhere like in here. This is really no problem seeing that V is somewhere like in this range right in here, right? And so this is telling me that my shadow detail to really see it is somewhere in the mid-20s. 23, 24, 25, 26, somewhere that's where it actually needs to be for me to see that detail. Now, so many of you have been taught that when you actually go in to process a file, that you take your black point and you drive it down to 0. That's an abstract. That's got nothing to do with your file. What you need to do is pick out what is your shadow detail and target it at a place where you can really see it. And it's in the mid-20s. Always will be. You'll see a little bit more on a monitor, because your monitor can show you a little bit more, but the master file that you ultimately build to print out will be in the mid-20s. If you feel like your shadow detail is a little too hot on your monitor, there's nothing to stop you from driving that slightly down. I'm going to take it from the mid-20s down to the mid-teens because I feel better about it on my monitor. But then somebody puts it on a shitty monitor and they can't see anything, right? All right, so that gives us our shadow detail here. What about the highlights? So flip side of the highlights. This is background is 234, 237, 240, 243, 46, 49, 52, and 55. Now we're going to work the other way, this way. Where do you just begin to see the detail for highlight? 46. Say what? 246. Anybody else? I'm going to agree with that. 246. This is really solid detail right here, right? This is pretty faint. This is unusable, and that's page white. They're all page white. This is too strong down in here. So right around that 246, maybe 240, somewhere in there is where my highlight detail is, right? Okay, everybody back. Remember this. Alrighty, so go to your application folder, and for the Macintosh people, you are looking for Color Checker Camera Calibration Software. You want to double click that to launch it. For the Windows people, it's the camera calibration, whatever they called it. And hopefully this will open up. Hopefully it will work. The people who are on the school computers, is the software there, I hope? Let me see this one. color checker calibration right here. No, that's not your bad. Did everybody find this and get it going? It may not. All right. So you'll see right at the very beginning it opens up and it gives you a warning. It says, wow, okay, display calibration is essential for proper visual evaluation of editing. Yeah, but again, that's just preaching to the choir, right? Go ahead and say okay to get rid of that guy. I'm going to double click again on the title that says close right here. So this is asking us now to drag and drop a file on here, and you can actually use this program now. In the old days, you could only make DNG profiles with this. You can now make DNG and ICC profiles, so that would be up at the very top. So in this case, we're going to select just DNG. Do not do dual illuminant and do not do ICC profile. Those would be for a different program. We are going to build these to use them in either Camera Raw or in Lightroom. And in Camera Raw and Lightroom, the underpinning RAW file is actually a DNG, regardless of what you're shooting. So select DNG is what we're going to do. And then we need to go find a file. And the file, it's a very specific one. So go to your folder that's got all the assignments in it, into your class week number 2, and inside that you will have a folder that says DNG Custom Profile Example Files. If you can open that folder up. And inside this folder, how many files do you actually have?
1.
And it's just the CR2 file, right? All right, I'm going to join you. Okay, so if you double click on the CR2 file, it should automatically come into Photoshop and load into Camera Raw. Did that happen for everyone, or did somebody go into, did anybody go into Capture One? Did anybody go into something else?
I went to Capture One.
So if you go to Capture One, here's the trick. Quit Capture One and go back out right now. I'm going to show this to everybody. Again, this is Macintosh specific. I apologize to the Windows people. There is a way to do the same thing on Windows, but I'm not entirely certain how to go about that. Hopefully yours simply opened up into Camera Raw the way it should correctly. So if this happens, you want to go, I'm in the Finder right now. I'm just going to click on my file once, and I'm going to do Get Info. You can do that either going up to the File menu down to Get Info, or just hit Command-I, and it will bring up a dialog box. And sort of down towards the very bottom, it will actually have an Open With button and a drop-down menu. And if you click on yours, those of you, when yours opened in Capture One, it's because this has been set to open in Capture One. You want to change it to open with Photoshop 2023. That would be the latest. And in my case, it is the default. You're not done yet. If you want this behavior to be for all of your RAW files, not just the specific one that you're using right now, you click on Change All, and it will change that system-wide so that every time you double-click on a RAW file, it'll actually open up in Photoshop. Now, this doesn't do anything to the file. If you, a year from now, say, well, I'm no longer interested in actually opening it up in Photoshop, I really would prefer it to open up in Camera Raw, whatever, you simply come here and change that, and you do the same process. You click on that and say Capture One, and then Change All, and then all your RAW files, when you double-click on them, will open Capture One. Are we good? Yes?
Mine show off when I double-click it.
You don't double-click it. You hit Get Info. Oh, when you double-click the file?
Yeah, like my Camera Raw doesn't open either.
Do you have Photoshop open?
Yeah.
Can you drag that file from on top of the icon for Photoshop?
I just pulled up the car.
If you have the car, if you have anything going on in the car, do you have like a curve on that you're trying to make? If you have anything that's incomplete, then Photoshop doesn't know what to do. It's waiting for you to finish whatever you wanted to do with the car.
Okay. I think I had that color.
Okay.
Okay, good.
All right. The car.
You can close the car. Okay, back in Photoshop. So, our first move is to zoom in on this guy. And I'm going to zoom in on the color picker. So, not the color picker, on the this guy, color checker. Anybody in this room not ever seen this guy? It's what you're looking at on my screen right now. It's this thing right here. Anybody not? Is this new to anyone? It's okay. So everybody's kind of familiar with this, right? This thing is a godsend. This thing will give you perfect exposure and perfect color on every image you take. How many of you own one? How many of you would like to have perfect color and perfect exposure on every image you take? Yeah, me too, right? I have not done a photo shoot. Again, I'm a commercial fashion beauty guy, whatever. I have not done a photo shoot without this card in one of my frames of every shoot that I do, whatever, for 30 years. And I don't fuck with it anymore. I have perfect exposure and perfect color every single time. I don't screw with any of this stuff. How many of you spend time, energy, and effort trying to get your exposure right, and then in post, trying to get your color right? This eliminates all of it. So anyway, this is how this thing works. Remember I said to you, we were looking at that patch up there. Where did you see highlight detail? Remember we said, oh, that 246, 249, that ranging right in there? There's a white patch on this card right here. This white patch is not meant to be 255. This white patch is real. This white patch has texture. It has detail. If you light this correctly, you can see the detail in this. It's a real thing. It's never meant to be page white. It was never meant to be 255. Where should I have this on my exposure if my exposure is correct? It should be between 245 and 250, and that is the exact numbers that we pulled off of that board. It's not some abstract that I'm just throwing out there for you guys. There is a reason for this. What I'm trying to do is maximize my exposure, get as much exposure as I can, because exposure, unlike film, exposure in digital is data. The more I can expose, the more light I can actually have hit the sensor, the more data I have to do what I want. So people say to me all the time, well, what if you wanted a really dark, moody picture? Wouldn't you shoot it dark and moody? Absolutely not. You shoot it with this thing maximized out, then you have the best data set you could have to then process that file and push it down and make it look horribly underexposed and really dark and moody. If you do it the other way around, you shoot it really dark and moody, every stop that you underexpose a digital file, you lose half of your data. One stop under is 50% of your data. Two stops under is 75% of your data is gone. It's lost. You cannot make a decent photograph with only 25% of the available data to the file. Make sense? We don't want to go down the logarithmic road right now. I've already jammed more into your head than so. But at some point, somebody write this down, at some point wants to see why this happens this way. So just shoot me a quick email and say, we'd like to know about the loss of exposure impacting your data. Okay, so first things first, if I come over to my white balance tool, so in the basic panel in Photoshop, in Camera Raw, have it open, click on the little color picker, the little, the eyedropper tool. Come over. Now we are going to actually pick one of these grays. That's the other thing about this. I've got neutral grays that are down at the bottom. And what the white balance tool does is that actually anything that you click on, it tries to make it a neutral gray. What is neutral gray by definition in an RGB world? Equal amounts of RGB. So you'll see, do this. Actually grab that color picker, hover over the red, don't click on it yet, but you can then look and see the values up in above the histogram. So in the red, in my case, it's a 196 red, a 50 green, and a 40 blue. That's the values in here. If this was to be neutralized, it would try to make those numbers all the same. So go ahead and click on the red, and you'll see what it does. It makes your image tons of blue into here. It can't even get there. It's so extreme. It's actually pulled the red down considerably. It's pushing up both the greens and the blues, but it can't ultimately even get there. The correction is too extreme. But that's not why I really wanted to use it. Unless you're Stephen Klein and this is your new color palette, then you're good to go. But other than that, anyway, if we come down to the patch that's right underneath it, the gray one, and click, you will actually see it color balances my entire image. These values are now almost identical, 197, 197, and a 196. You will never notice the difference in that 196 and that 197. This is now color neutralized. This is color balanced. This is, now I've got, so once I do that, I'm going to then hover over the white patch and get my readout values of the white patch. And you can see 246, 246, 245. Perfect exposure and perfect color. And all it took was shooting this. Change your life. You cannot live without this. You cannot be a digital photographer without one of these. You just can't do it unless you don't care. And if you don't care, fuck your camera. Just use your phone. Make sense? Okay, so this part's actually working out pretty well for me right now. But the reason I'm here has nothing to do with any of this part. I just wanted to give you an idea of what was going on while I was here. We need to make a DNG out of this because the software that we're using needs a DNG copy of this file to do it. So to do that, is everybody working on a version of Camera Raw that looks something like this? Because I've had people who use really old versions, so if you're using a really old version, I can usually speak that language. I remember how the old ones looked, but hopefully not. If you come over to the gear at the very top right-hand corner and click on that, our window will actually open up, and this is where we can actually, take that back, not the gear, but the little box next to it that's got the arrow in it that's pointing down. Click on the little box with the arrow. And it will open up, and what this thing, if you don't change anything in here, whatever, it's designed to create a DNG for you. So you'll see up at the very top, it says where to save this thing, and in our case, I want to save this in the very same location that it came from, and then once you save that, you don't need to do anything else. Now, you can gang these. You can actually bring in 1,000 images into Camera Raw, and you can do these one at a time and all of that. You may want to save stuff at different places for that, but in our case, we're going to keep it right along with the raw file that actually created it. I'm not going to change the naming of it. I'm going to leave its file extension as DNG. That's how I know the difference between the CR2 and the DNG. And then the rest of this, you can all just leave it default and then simply hit save. If you're doing a ton of them, if you noticed really quickly in the lower left-hand corner, there was a progression bar that came across. If you're doing a ton of them, you'll get a progress bar that will actually, say, oh yeah, you're working, it's going to take you another 10 minutes or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But in our case now, we've made the DNG, and it actually should be located right next to that CR2. So we don't need to do anything else in here. We can hit cancel. Don't change anything in this. So just hit the cancel button. I'm going to get rid of the car. You don't need the car. I don't need the car. And I don't need to save it. And I'm going to go back to my Finder, and you should see a DNG that's sitting right next to it. Does everybody have that guy? Okay. If you then bring your color checker to the front and move it slightly down, you can drag and drop the DNG right into the field of that profile software. If you can't, or if you can't find it, you can always, in the color calibration software, you can come up to the file menu and do add image, and this will bring up a conventional dialog box that lets you navigate to wherever you want to navigate. But in my case, I'm just going to grab the DNG file, not the CR2, but the DNG, and I'm going to drag it on top of this button, on top of this window. It's actually loading the file. And it's looking for the card, and it's actually found it. In my case, it comes up with a grid that's sitting on top of the card. If for some reason you can't find the image, there are controls on the side over here to move your image around. So the first one by default that's actually clicked is an arrowhead. You can actually click on any of the little green corner dots and adjust this grid to sort of like move it around. In my case, the registration was perfect, so you don't want to mess with that part. But you want it so that those squares are sitting right in the middle of your color card, of your color checker, right in the middle part of it. You'll also notice that there are two faces to this color checker. This is the standard, the one that's got all the colors in just one row of white or one row of grays on it. The other is for a completely different issue that we do other things with. But so this is the face it's always going to look for. If you can't find, if the software can't find it, you need to locate it. You need to, and you'll be able to move this around. There's a hand in here. If you hold down the space bar, you'll get a hand. You can move around your image. You just need to make sure that this is sitting on top of your image the way this is, and then you should be good to go. Are we good on this part? Okay, before we do anything else, go back out to your desktop, your Finder, whatever you call your Windows machine. I actually need to name this profile. Profiles for your camera are not only specific to your camera and the sensor, but they're also, if you really care about this work, and I do, the profile that we're going to make, you could use for, again, you would have to do your camera. This is my camera that you're doing right now. This profile will not work for your camera. These profiles are just as specific for devices as the monitor calibration is. You have to do this for, shoot a picture with your camera and do this with your camera, then you will have your profile. That profile will work for 90% of the time that you're actually using it and want to actually do color correction. If you are really particular about it, and I do one of these for every single shoot that I do. Now, the shooting that we're looking at right now started in the morning. There were different light situations. As long as the light is consistent, so for instance, if I go in the studio and I'm shooting, and let's say I'm doing 10 shots in the studio of 10 different outfits, and my lighting never changes, I don't do a profile for all 10 of those situations. I do one profile for the whole session. But if the lighting is changing, okay, it got overcast, or I brought out a strobe to add to this, or I added another head that's, whatever that is, you've changed your lighting, you should do another profile. But again, that's pushing this as hard as I can possibly push it, but that's how I work and what I would do. So at any rate, if you come out and you select just the file name, what I need to do is just copy the file name. That's all I need to do. I'm dyslexic. This is a nightmare for me to try to retype this in. So I simply select the file once. If you hit the return key, it will select just the name, and then I do Command-C to copy it. Then when I go back into my profiling software, I can just paste in the name of the file. You want your profiles to have the same name as your file. That way it makes sense. If you just do photo, flowers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or your profiles, profile 1, profile 2, that means nothing. You need to know what profile you made for what shooting that you did so that you can use that profile for that shooting. Does that make sense? So this is just an easy way for me to do it. So it's going to say, give me the option now to create profile. So I'm going to click on the button down there, create profile, and it's going to offer to name this, and it offers to name it after based on my sensor, which makes sense. But I need to be more specific than this. Whose Canon EOS 5D Mark II is this? What lighting situation was I in? All of those kind of things play into this. So this name is meaningless to me. So I'm going to hit the delete key. Now you would think that normally you could just paste in the name that we just copied. Command V will do nothing. There's nothing you can do in here right now that seems obvious to put the name in there. If you hold down for Macintosh, we need to do what is called a right click. If you're on Windows, you may not be having this problem, but Windows will still allow you to do a right click because it's got, in the Macintosh world, to do a right click, if you're working on a trackpad, it's a 2-finger swipe. If you're working without a trackpad, if you've got an external mouse, it's got a right button, that's great. If you don't have any of that stuff, you hold down the Control key and click your mouse. And nothing happens. You hold down I know it's the Control key, hang on. Yeah, Control key and click, you'll get a drop-down menu. That's what the 2 button is all about, or the right click, and then simply hit paste. And that's going to actually put in, it overwrit? I was an English major. Overwrit? Oh my God. I moved to Italy. I lived in Italy for 8 years, and I thought this is a great opportunity. I'm going to learn Italian, and I'm going to add that to my English. And instead, I've never learned Italian, and I forgot most of my English. So it didn't work out well for me. It overwrote the extension, and we need the extension of this, so put in .dcp, digital camera profile. That's what it is. I need everybody to whip out their phone. Again, this will be slightly different on Windows, but on the Windows, because this is part of your homework. You're going to have to do this for 4 shootings for your homework. So we are doing, it's not going to be this specific file, it's 4 other sessions that you're actually using. This is where the files are actually located, the profiles for your camera are actually located. You're going to turn those in, so you need to be able to find them and get them. In the assignment, if you look at the assignment PDF, there's the path for Windows people how to get there. There's also the one for Mac. It's just for me, it's easier to show it, and you shoot a picture of it and you'll know where to go look for it. So you're turning in the profiles. Once you get into this folder right here that you see, you don't want to remove the profiles because then they're no longer available to you. You simply want to make a copy of them, and that's turn in the copy. Make sense? Okay, so this is where it's all going. It's named correctly. The problem that I've got with this, though, is that the name is a little bit long for me. I've got a frame number in here that I don't need, and I've also got a shot number in here that I don't need, but I've got so many of these, I'm going to put in some wild number. You don't need to do this. You just need the name. I'm going to put in 48, because I've probably got 1,000 of these. Okay, and then just hit save. Profile was successfully saved, say OK, and then you can simply quit this software. Okay, the D&G has done its work, and this is just advice to you guys right now. You need to read, be very specific when you read the assignment about doing this. Because there's a way that you can create a D&G that doesn't use this profile, and we don't want to do that. And basically it's this. We've already created this D&G and everything, it's a raw file basically, so everything that we did when we were making it in Camera Raw is embedded in this. Every change that we make from this point on will not be saved, and you're going to turn in a D&G that needs to have this profile in it. So we're just going to make another one. So throw this guy away, and then double-click on your raw file again. If you had troubles before double-clicking, just drag your raw file on top of the Photoshop icon. We need to get the raw file back into Photoshop, into Camera Raw. Are we good? Okay. So we can do the white balance trick again. So we can just zoom in on this, and I'm going to grab the white balance tool. And I'm going to click on, again, the reason I don't white balance on the white patch is that it's putting a curve on here to adjust the color, and if you do it up in the highlights, the curve is so close to the white point, you don't have a lot of room to move. You guys know this if you're actually working with a curve. Most people start working with a curve sort of in the middle area of your scale. Nobody works really close to either end of it. Same thing is here. You would actually, I always use the gray patch that's right next to the red. So it's actually now been color balanced. However, you see this thing that says profile? This has become so important to Photoshop now. They've moved this. If you go back 2 years in Photoshop, this profile right here was buried down in the calibration tab. This has now been moved up second in command before you even get to anything else in here. So if you take a look at this drop-down menu, you've got all sorts of Adobe canned profiles. Everybody's trying to compete with Instagram, and this is not what we want to do here. These are just canned profiles. Canva standard or Adobe Color is the one that normally will load for you, whatever, but we want to use the profile that we just created. Again, this profile is going to remove the distortion of color that's introduced by my camera sensor. So to do that, you can click on the browse button at the bottom. I don't do that. I actually click on the little icon that's next to it. It looks like 4 little squares with a magnifying glass on it. This will actually open up the profile matching dialog box. It brings us into another one. It's got the neutral ones at the very top. You can come up and down the window. The one that we're looking for here is actually in the profile folder. If you click on that drop-down menu, it will open up and you will actually see the profile that you just created, named for the one that you just created. Does everybody see their custom profile? Okay, I don't want you to actually select it. All you need to do is hover over the thumbnail and it will actually give you a preview on your image. And then when you come off of your thumbnail, it will go back to the unprofiled state. Look at what happens Look at her coat. Look at her sweater. That supersaturated sweater is the unperverted color that sweater really was. What's happening now is that my sensor is hypersensitive to blue and it's actually destroyed. How do you know this? How could you ever do this? You can't. And you say, well, oh God, versus this just seems like so much work. I can't, blah, 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 blah. Imagine yourself as a digital tech for a brand new photographer, and day one you walk in and you say, would you like me, before we get started here, would you like me to do a quick profile for all your camera bodies? What? You can do what? What? Photographers are dumb as shit. They don't know anything. They rely on all of their crew because they don't know anything. A little humor and a pretty face gets you a long way. You don't have to know photography, right? You guys are going to change that. Does this make sense? Look at how different this is. If you zoom in and look at the card, look at the blue patch on the card. Look at the blue and that sort of like, I don't know, what other color patch. Just hover over and come back, hover over and come back, hover over and come back. How on earth would you know? If this is not a color correction in the same sense that white balance is, this is now looking at your sensor and saying, where is it deficient? What's happening with my sensor, you see, when I hover over this thing, my blues get much darker. What that's telling me is that my sensor is hypersensitive to blue. It's actually reading more blue than is there. And what this profile now is doing is removing that extra blue, and that's why the little blue patch gets darker. But there's no way you could look at this image and ever know that. But now you do. And so to finish this up, you simply click on it. That will now apply that profile. If we then click on the back button up at the very top, you'll see that profile has now been loaded. I am color balanced. I am still reading that 246, 246, 246 for that white patch. I'm going to zip back out. This is now perfect exposure and more than perfect color. This is now device independent color. And if I bring this into Photoshop right now, it comes into that Adobe RGB mathematical space. And as long as it stays there, if I don't change any of that, it's good to go. I will be able to correct this on any device, on any computer, anywhere in the world. Make sense? Game changer. Okay. Are there any questions about this? Again, so for your homework, and if there are any questions about your homework, I spell it out pretty succinctly, but just let me know and we'll be good to go. So at this stage of the game, most people would go straight into Photoshop with this. You don't want to do that. At this stage of the game, you want to create another DNG because you want to embed this. The problem that we have now is that everyone on their computer right now has this custom profile. But if we do nothing else, if we just open this image up into Photoshop now, make a TIFF out of it or a PSD out of it and save it, when you go to, let's say you give me the file and I go to my machine, I don't have this profile on my machine. And it isn't embedded in your Photoshop file. In order to embed it, we need to create a DNG for it. So you do the same thing again. You come up to that box with the arrow that points down, click on it, say you want to save this as a DNG. Then we're going to cancel this, go back into the Finder, and open up the DNG. And this is where you would start. This is what you would work with. You'll see the minute I open it back up, it's got the profile in it. If you or somebody to give this to me, whatever, this DNG has got that custom profile embedded in it. Otherwise, if you only work on your computer and you only work on this laptop and you never work on anything else, you don't really have to do that step because all the custom profiles that you make will be saved on your computer. But the minute you change to a computer or something else, whatever, you're out of luck. Or you upgrade your computer, all the old profiles will not be on your new computer. This is a way that you ensure that they're embedded in the file that you actually start with. We good on this part? Okay. Are you excited? You should be. Your color just took a huge lift. So did your exposure. A couple other things that we can think about while we're here really quickly, just in terms of how I would actually process this. The white point of this thing has already been processed, but the black point of this guy If we zip in here and take a look around this, so I'm going to actually look at this guy right in here. I'm going to look at the area that's right underneath the shadow that's being cast on her black shirt. So if this is a black shirt with a shadow on it, I don't really expect to have shadow detail there. Where I expect to have shadow details, if you look at her shirt down below this, it's somewhere down below in this area, sort of where maybe the transition of that wrinkle, that's where I really expect shadow detail to be. So I'm hovering over that, and look at your readout up here in the very top. I'm reading in the 28, 28, 28. That's exactly where we said, based on the file the print that we looked at, where we want our shadow detail. If it wasn't enough, what you can do is you can come over to the far right-hand side. We can click a color sampler. So this is this little, it's the eyedropper tool all the way on the far lower right-hand side that will allow you to put down markers on your image that will actually show you, give you a permanent, not a permanent, but it'll give you a readout. So I'm going to click on the readout that's just slightly above this. I'm reading in the low 20s right now. So I'm going to click on that, and it gives me a readout right here. And this way I can come in and I can take my shadow slider and I can slightly lift it, watching that little readout. And in this case, its shadows is too high up in the mid-range for me, so it looks like it's going to be more in the blacks. So I'm going to lift the blacks. So I'm going to come down to the blacks, and I'm going to start to lift them up. It's going to be shadows and blacks both. So I'm going to hit them both up until I'm getting roughly around those mid-20s, which is where I'm at right now. And this is how you process your file. So it's the lower right-hand side. It looks like a eyedropper with a little icon next to it. And you can put these all over your image. Make sense? So now I've got the perfect dynamic range for my image as well. My shadow detail is in that mid-20s. My highlight detail is in those 245 to 250 range, whatever. I've got neutral color and I've got device-independent color. And we did all of this in an afternoon. Okay. You can say done in this because now we do want to apply all of that part to this. We do want to keep all of those things in there, and you should be good to go. Okay. Smart objects. Who in here has never heard of it? Okay, so we're going to start from scratch on that. For those of you who do know smart objects, great. For those of you who don't worry, we're going to get caught up on this. So smart objects are features in Photoshop. This is the best way that I can describe this to you. So this is the way I'm going to actually look at it. So let's open an image first. Let's go ahead and do the red car again. I hate to keep going back to it, but everybody knows where to find it. We don't need to spend forever getting to it. Okay, so I've got the red car here, and yeah, this is a good way of doing it. So does everybody have the red car open? I really have no affinity for this red car. I knock on wood, I never went through midlife crisis, so I never wanted the Corvette. I didn't want the young girl, I didn't want the young guy, I didn't want a dog, I don't want plant, I didn't want kids, I don't want any of that stuff, right? So anyway, I just keep coming back to it because it's convenient. Okay, so everybody got the car open? Anybody not? Okay, the first thing we're going to do is make a duplicate of this background. To do that, hit Command J. If you think about it, the way to help remember this is Command J, it stands for jump. So basically we're jumping the old layer to a new one. So I've got a new layer that's right here, and I'm going to transform this layer. Again, I'm not a keyboard shortcut guy. There's 10 of them in my life. You're going to get 10 of them all semester long, but I'm not going to, somebody who knows how to, Command Shift Option Backspace forward key delete and the B and L key with your elbow on the brightness control. I don't know what that key, I don't know, I will never know that. So at any rate, Command T though will bring up the transform dialog box. When that happens, you'll actually have your options palette along the top changes because of the tool that we've actually selected. So for instance, if you were to hit Command T It's waiting for the transform to happen. If you want to get rid of the transform dialog box without doing anything, the icons that are on the far right-hand side, you'll see there's one with a circle and a slash through it. That means it'll undo anything you've done. So if you've done a transform, it'll get rid of it. If you hit the check mark, it'll go ahead and do the transform. In that case, I just want to get rid of it to show you. If I hit Command B now, it actually, I'm sorry, not Command B, just the B tool. B will actually bring up the brush tool, and so the options along the very top change depending on how I've got my brush set up. But again, I'm going to go back to Command T, the transform dialog box. The things that we care about at the top here are this. You have a width and a height readout at the very top. Both of them are at 100% right now, and you've got what's supposed to be a chain link right between the two. If you click on the chain link, now a lot of you know that the keyboard shortcut, if you hold down the Shift key, it'll do your transform and maintain the aspect ratio. In my case, it's just easier to go up here and click on that chain link to do the same thing. Then we need to change the scale of this. We're going to actually make it considerably smaller. There's a number of ways of doing it. You can click on any of the corner control points, so I can come over to the upper right-hand corner, click and sort of drag down, and it will actually bring my image in. It's going to make it smaller. Command Z will undo that. The other way that you can do it is you can actually hover over either the width or the height and change those values. So right now they're both at 100%. So I could actually type across the height, for instance, and type in 50, and then hit the Enter key once, and it will type in 50. The Enter key will usually do your transform as well, except in this case, it actually entered the value, and then I would have to hit it a second time to actually go ahead and do the transform. You'll notice that it changed the height to match. The width and height are actually matching each other right now. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. You can actually, it didn't undo that, so I'm going to go back to 100%. I'm just typing the value in, hitting the Enter key once. You can actually click on the value and type something in directly. You can actually click on or just hover over the height, the H or the W. This is how I do it. Once you hover over the H or the W, you get what they call the scrubby slider. It's a hand that's got an arrow that points right to left. This allows you to simply click and drag. If you drag to the left, it makes your image smaller. If you drag to the right, it makes it larger. I'm going to drag mine all the way down to 5%. And hopefully your width will do the same thing. And now you've still got your little marks around the corner of the transform part. I haven't accepted this transform yet. You need to click on the check mark. And you can see we've made a very, very, very small car. If you turn off the eyeball of the background layer, you can see just how small that car is. It's a little bitty baby tiny car. Does everybody have the little bitty baby tiny car? Great. What? Your Photoshop just hates you today. Admit it.
I was trying to undo it, and then it I don't know what happened.
That's okay. You just hit Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, or just hit cancel out of here. Hit cancel out of here. Cancel the whole thing. Just the circle, this line. Good. And then Command T. Actually, hang on, because you've changed something here. Go back so it says layer copy. Yep. Click on that. Click on that. First, you got to click out of here first.
Oh, okay.
Command, click, and then go back to that layer copy. Good. Perfect. And now Command T. Good. Click on the link between width and height. That chain link. Perfect. Hover over the H. Grab the slubby slider and drag down. Click and drag down until you get to, don't go negative.
Oh, okay.
To 5%. Yep. And if you can't quite get to 5%, you can just type it in. Okay. So we've transformed this thing down. Great. We're now going to transform it again. You can leave off the car that's on the background. You don't need to see it. Make sure that you do have this layer selected. It's our layer number 1. Command T again to transform again. I'm going to click on the link between the width and the height. It's just a normal process for me. You'll notice that my transforms have reset. They're at 100% again. We need to actually then scale this up back to its original thing. When I went from 100% down to 5, that was a 20 times reduction. I need to now go up 20 times. So the value that you want to type into either of the width or the height box is 2,000, 2, 1, 2, 3 zeros. Your car should look something like it is supposed to look right now, and then go ahead and click on the check mark. And it just brought your car up. Click on the eyeball on the car that's underneath, and then turn on and off the eyeball for the transform layer that we just did. Do you see any difference? Oh, you can shout that out loud. Yeah, the top one couldn't be more fucked up. And if yours is not, you did something wrong. Is everybody's all fucked up on the top? Is there a no in there anywhere? No. I told you your Photoshop hates you today. You can hate it back, you know. So you didn't have the link connected. So again, we're going to go back in history. Go back to, I don't know what layer, visibility. Go back to free transform. Good, right there. And your car is really small right now. You can turn off the eyeball. So again, we're going to do Command T again. Click on the link between width and height. Click on either one of them. Type in 2000. And then hit the check mark. And you're good. Fucked up car. This is called destructive work here. This is, we have now, what we did, because this is pixel based, we shrunk the car down and then we actually pulled it back up again. Well, we had already, when we shrunk it down, that was a destructive move. We threw away all that other pixel information, all the stuff that was there before that represented the big car, that's just gone. We can't work like that. We need to work in an environment where we can do things like this that are non-destructive, where this does not happen. Does that sort of make sense? And so this is it. It's smart objects. So if you go over to your history palette and come back to where we started, I'm going to click on the layer via copy. This is the history state of what our image looked like when we first made that copy. So I've just got 2 copies of the car and they both are pretty good. Make sense? Okay, I'm going to change the top copy. So we're selected on the very top copy. You want to come up to your layer menu, down to Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. So again, look at the screen really quick, up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. And when you do that, you won't really notice a whole lot of difference unless you've actually got the icons in all of your palettes big. Have we talked about how to do that? See the size of my thumbnails right here? You can actually get a lot of information with big thumbnails. So if you want them, and you should, come up to the palette, take a look at my screen, the little 3 lines that represent the drop-down menu for the layers palette that's on the far right side. If you click on that, click on that, come down to Panel Options. You can then click the radio button that's right next to the largest of the thumbnails and say OK. You would also want to go to your Path palette and do the exact same thing, Panel Options, thumbnail, radio button next to the biggest icon, and then finally over to Channels. You want to do the same thing over there. So Panel Options, click on the radio button right next to the largest thumbnail. There's so much information you can pick up from the thumbnail and you want it, so you might as well keep them big. So if you take a look at the second layer right now, you'll notice that there's this weird little icon that's in the lower right-hand corner that got added to it. That's telling you that this is now a smart object. Does everybody have that weird little icon down there? Okay, we're going to do our transforms again. Command T. Click on the chain link between width and height. Use your scrubby slider or however you want to get that thing down to 5%. Click on the check mark to say OK. And we've got the little bitty baby file again. Again, all I did was turn off the visibility of my underlayer. This is now, it's the little bitty file again. But now I'm not going to hit undo. I'm going to transform again. Command T. You will now notice, though, that those did not reset to 100% width and height. They understood that this was a transform down to 5%. I'm going to click on the chain link between width and height. I'm going to drag across the value. I'm going to type in 100 to get it back to 100%, and I'm going to click on the check mark, and my file is now restored with no damage done. Non-destructive transforming. When we get into doing compositing here, especially this is important because you're making, when you're trying to fit, let's say you're trying to take a figure and put it into a background, it's a constant struggle between getting the scaling right of that figure and everything else that's in the background. So you're making things bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, and you do enough of that, your image will look like that car that that we fucked up. Make sense? This is not. Hit the B key really quickly for the brush tool and hover over your image. You don't get the brush tool. You get this circle with a line through it. You cannot paint on a smart object. Hit the S tool, the S key for this clone stamp tool. Same thing happens. You can't clone stamp on it. This is what is happening. This is the way to think about smart objects. A smart object is an envelope, just like this. I've taken my image. This is an image not of the red Corvette, although that would be really funny, so I'm going to print out the red Corvette for this class next semester. Anyway, what has happened here is when I created a smart object, what has happened is that Photoshop took this image, it put it inside this protective envelope. Now, once it's in here, there's a lot I can't do to it. I can't paint on this. I can't clone stamp this. I can't do any of those things on this guy. What I can do, though, is things like transform, because it's giving me the illusion of this being reduced to 5%. But the truth of it is, the image that's inside here is untouched. It is protected. I cannot do anything to this image in this state right now. I can give it the illusion that it's smaller or that it's bigger. So all of that work that I'm doing to it doesn't change the file that's inside of here at all. Does that make sense to everybody? However, I can edit this thing if I want to. I can pull this image out and edit it. To see what that means, double click on the smart object. So just come over to the layer, double click on it. And if you have tabbed behavior set up, you will not see this like I see it. But because I don't have my images set to come out as tabs, because I have it set to come out as separate images, you'll see I actually get a separate image of this. What I've now just done is I have just pulled this image out. My old envelope is still sitting in my original file. You can see it. It's sitting right there behind it. If I were to click on this, you would see it behind it. But this has now not only come out, it's also changed. This is no longer a PSD file. This is a PSB file. This is this file that has actually been pulled out. I'm going to invert this file so you see what I'm talking about. Hit Command-I. It will actually change the coloring of your image. We just inverted the image. That's all we did. And now close it. And when it asks you to save it, say, yes, I do want to save this. So now the image that was inside this envelope has been changed. I could edit it, and this is what I end up with right here. However, I can still transform this. I can do all sorts of things to this. But does that sort of make sense what's going on? Okay. I want everybody to copy this layer right now, Command-J. Again, you're jumping another layer. I now have two smart objects in here. I'm going to double click on the first one just to open it up again. This again has opened up in a separate file all by its lonesome. I'm going to invert it again, Command-I. It'll just bring it back to its normal state. I'm going to go ahead and close this up and save it. And look what we have. We not only were able to invert the car and bring it back, but both of them changed. Why is that? What's happened here is that I made the smart object. I created it and I put it in here. It's safe. When I copied this thing, it didn't make another copy of this. It didn't make a second smart object. It simply made another reference to this whole setup right here. This is just another reference. So if I pull this out and change it, and then save it and put it back in, all the layers that reference the same thing all change with it. I can make 1,000 layers here, and they will all change. Which is great if you're a wallpaper designer or a fabric designer. You can actually do wholesale changes. Let's say you've got 100,000 layers doing the print of your wallpaper. You can go in and change one element on this, and it'll change all 1,000 layers. Does that sort of make sense, what's going on here? Okay. So this is creating a smart object once we've got the image in Photoshop. Where this really shines is if you use this with your raw data. So one of the problems that we have, or that I think is really an issue, is that when you develop a raw file and you make you start working, you got to Photoshop a TIFF file or a PSD file or that kind of stuff, whatever, you leave the raw data behind. You save that file, it looks pretty, you do all that, but you're in Photoshop now. You're no longer in, you've got a PSD or a TIFF or a JPEG or something. You do not have a CR2 file. That's not what you're working on, right? So it would be great if I could embed that raw data in my Photoshop file so that I had it there, so that 10 10 years from now, if I want to edit this file, I don't have to go find the raw file again. Who knows where that is? I can't remember the name because I never used a naming convention. I used Flowers1. Does that sort of make sense? So we can do that. So we're going to close this up. The next thing we're going to do, and it's going to be the rest of today. Sorry we didn't get to another break, but I've got to get through this part. So to make it easier, you do not need to save any of that stuff. I'm going to help you do your homework. We're going to do one of your assignments right now. And I say this all the time. It's unbelievable to me. We're going to do it right now. And if you save this file the way we finish it, because I'm pretty sure we have time, and turn it in, you're going to get 100 on this. And I'm telling you right now, in the past, about a third of you would not turn the file in. And we're doing it right now. There's no easier grade, there's no easier assignment than doing one with me. And I try to do a number of these in class. So I can't promise all the time, but today is going to be one of them. So please do this now. Okay, so if we go back to our folder number 2, so our class number 2, there's a file in there called Bruce Fraser Copyright 2005.dng. If you can double click on that, it should also bring this open into Camera Raw. It's a picture of a castle somewhere in Scotland, I'm sure. Did everybody find this and get this open? You may not. Yeah, and if you don't want to do the whole change thing right now, simply drag it on top of your Photoshop icon. Drag the DNG on top of Photoshop and it'll open in that. All right, everybody good? Okay, the first thing we need to do is get back to the original. This is actually a DNG, so it remembers any adjustments that have been made to it inside the DNG itself. That's unlike any other raw file that you can work with, but nonetheless. To get back to the original, if you look on the far right-hand side to the toolbar that's on the right-hand side, there's 3 little dots that are sort of at the bottom of that. There's 2 sets of icons. There's one kind of at the top and one at the bottom. This is the bottom of the ones that are at the top. Wow, how confusing is that? You guys, just take a look at my screen. This is where you want to go. Okay, the 3 little dots that are right there, and you can come down to Reset to Default. If you do that, your image will look awful. Well, but this is 2005. There were cell phones with cameras. Actually, they existed, but no iPhone existed at this point. This was 2 or 3 years before iPhone was actually released. But anyway, it should look horrible like this. So, if you've got your Camera Raw set up the way that I suggested that you should see this thing that says Open Object down in the lower right-hand corner. If that's not the case, you simply hold down your Shift key and it will change to Open Object. If you leave it the way it is, if it's been set up correctly to say is Open Object, then hold it. So Shift key gives you the opposite of whatever's down there. So if Open Object is down there, you hold down the Shift key, it'll give you a regular open, which means it will open not as a smart object, but as a regular file. And then the opposite, if it just says open and you hold down the Shift key, you'll have the opportunity to open as an object. So anyway, we work in smart objects as much and as long as hard as we can in this class. So let me ask you this, because this is where we're going next. How do you guys dodge and burn?
It depends on if I'm using Lightroom or Photoshop.
Oh, I do.
Either one.
I create a gray layer and burn.
So you do a curve and you change it, or no? I'm sorry. You do what?
I create like a separate layer that's like I forgot what you call it, but it's pretty much just a gray layer, and I dodge.
Oh yeah. So soft light layer, and you're actually dodging and burning using black and white, right? Yeah, that's one way of doing it. Other people. Curves. A lot of people do curves. So a lot of people will put a curve on that's lightening and another curve that's darkening, a mask on them both, and then paint in to lighten and darken your image. Great. Right? Anybody else?
If I use Lightroom, I just have like the extra like dodge and burn section in Lightroom Classic that I just use.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? You're all wrong. Horribly wrong. The reason you're horribly wrong is that you're actually, in Lightroom it's a little bit different. In Lightroom you're okay, but anyway. But in Photoshop, once I bring this file into Photoshop itself. Right now, I'm in Camera Raw. I'm working with a raw file. Once I bring this into the Photoshop workspace, I no longer have that raw data. I'm actually working now on what we call a baked file. So again, it's been processed, whatever I set up in Camera Raw to do the processing, but then it gets processed and it comes into Photoshop, and all of those adjustments, no matter what they are baked into that file. And so when I go to put my curve on it to make it lighter or darker, if you're doing a small little adjustment part, that's fine. You can make things a little bit lighter or darker. But what if you're doing really wholesale work? You really want to do massive tonal change. There simply isn't the information there. However, all of that information exists in your raw file. Wouldn't it be great if you could just get to that raw file and do it again? That's the way we are going to move forward with this, and it's the way I expect to see any of the stuff that you guys ultimately do, the way you should be working. Again, all of this is going to be relatively new to you. You needed a new way to work because the way that you have been taught so far sucks. There's all this power, and it's all basically been pitched because people are too fucking lazy to learn it. All right, so we're going to change that. The problem with changing this right now, this is the last part that will be slightly confusing, is this. There have been 5 generations of Camera Raw since the beginning. If you go back to 2003, which is when Camera Raw, I think it's 2003, which is when Camera Raw was actually introduced, that version of Camera Raw existed, and then 2 years later they rewrote it. And they made another version of it. And then 3 or 4 years after that, they rewrote it again. And this just keeps going on, and it will keep going on forever. So there are all these different versions. If you're old enough, if you've been doing this long enough, whatever, you'll know that the basic panel never looked like this. The basic panel had highlight recovery in it, and if you go back far enough, they had none of the recoveries were in it. That didn't exist. So I'm going to give you the values to process this file. The problem is that when I first wrote this, I was using a different version of Camera Raw. So in order to use the numbers that I'm going to give you, we all need to use that same older version of Camera Raw. This is not some magic thing. This is only because this is a legacy file that I've worked on for years ago, right? You would never want to do this on a brand new file. If we were just starting out from scratch here, that I'm just starting out here, but I need this to go fast, and I need you guys to then experience this, because that's the different versions of Camera Raw are not what this is all about. It's really about this whole idea of how to dodge and burn. Fair enough? So we need to get back to the old version. To do that, scroll down to the bottom of your properties panel. You're looking for calibration. It's the one that's at the very bottom. If you click on it and it actually opens up, you will see that under the word calibration, under process, it has a whole series of these. So there have been 6 versions of Camera Raw that have happened since its history. So can everybody find this again? I've opened up the calibration panel, which is at the very bottom. And inside it, the first thing is process, and I'm going to click on the drop-down menu. And the version that you want to pick here is version 2. And then when you go back up to your basics panel, you will see that things have changed considerably. There is now exposure, recovery, fill light, blacks, brightness, and contrast. Clarity's there, but texture and all those other ones are gone. All of this is completely different. Again, there is no reason, if you are starting from today going forward, to use anything but the most current version, which would be version 6. But to make this work, I'm going to give you the values to plug in, and therefore we've got to go back to the one that I originally built this in. And this is also the reason that they leave these legacy versions of Capture One in here. Camera Raw in here, is that, let's say that you did, I don't know, some incredible shooting, whatever, 10 years ago, and you've got all these incredible files, and you want to match exactly, you want to process something else, and you want it to match, you need to go back to your old processing. So these are the values. I'm going to just give you numbers, and you need to type them in. So this has happened before in this class. Somehow people got the idea that the numbers I'm giving you are magic numbers and that they're going to work for every file you've ever had. They're not. So these are specific to this image and this image alone. Are we good on that part? Okay, so let's start at the top. I'm going to ask you to actually select the color temperature if you drag across it. By the way, really quickly, just so that you know, see this slider right here goes from blue to yellow? See this one that goes from green to magenta? Does that ring a bell to anybody? It's the LAB coordinates. Now these don't translate exactly to the same ones that LAB does. It's just the same x's, it's just cocked slightly, but it does the exact same thing. And then what's all of this? This is all brightness, this is L. We are now working in LAB, or a facsimile of it. Make sense? Okay, so if you select the color temperature at the very top, I'm going to read out these values. I want you to plug these in. If you use the tab key between entries, it'll simply drop you down to the next box, so you don't have to keep selecting these boxes. So for this top one up here, for the color temperature, I want you to type in 6800, 6800. Hit the tab key. 7 is the value already in for the tint. You can leave that there. Hit the tab key. For your exposure, drag it down to a minus 0.95. You can go to a -1. These numbers don't have to be perfectly exact, but I'm going to do as close as I can. A minus 0.95, so almost a stop under. Hit the tab key. For recovery, leave it at 0. Hit the tab key. For fill, leave that at 0. Hit the tab key. For the blacks, I want you to take that up to 18, so just type in 18. Hit the tab key. For brightness, type in 81. Hit the tab key for contrast, 56. Hit the tab key for clarity, 52. Hit the tab key for vibrance, 35. And finally, tab key for saturation, 0. What's the difference in vibrance and saturation?
Affects different colors.
This is important. The difference in vibrance and saturation. What vibrance does is it looks at your image and it says, okay, things that are not very saturated, we're going to hit pretty hard, but things that are already saturated, we're going to back off. Saturation hits everybody. Saturation just hits everybody as hard as it possibly can. Vibrance also tends to avoid what they call skin tones. When we get into looking at the color behind skin tones, because everybody's like, well, what's skin tone? Is it Caucasian? Is it African American? Is it Asian? What is it? You will find that the color that's underneath most skin tones is really pretty close to one another. Brightness is what becomes a real issue in that. So again, that's kind of the idea behind it. So that's what we're doing here. So with all of this done, you want to make sure that you open this as an object. So if your thing says open as object, the way we had our preferences set up, great, just click on it. If not, if it says just open, hold down your shift key and you will get open object and you will click on it, and we just need to open it and bring this open into Photoshop. And it should look like this. Everybody good? Okay. This is now a copy of my raw data. If I save this file, go ahead and save the file. Let's do it right now, really quick. Come up to the File menu, come down to a Save As. I'm going to call mine, and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it Castle. And the drop-down menu, I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. I have a volume called Toss. That's where I'm going to put mine. You should save yours someplace because this is going to be your homework. We've now actually saved this file. I'm going to close it. Just click on the red button to close it, to get rid of it. It's now been saved, and I've closed it. I'm going to come up to my File menu, down to Open Recent, and I'm going to open the file that I just closed. So you see I've gone through this whole process to close the file, save it, whatever. I wanted to go through that so that you realize that I still have a copy of my raw data in here. Double-click on the Smart Object. Instead of actually pulling this out, it is still a protective cover, but instead of actually pulling this out, and this is already a baked image and I can just work on it, which is what we did with the car, this actually takes me back into Camera Raw. This is a copy of my raw data that is embedded in my Photoshop file. 50 years from now, I can actually open this thing up and I can get to my raw data. I don't have to go looking for it ever again. Game changer. No? No, yes.
I got a pop-up that says maximize compatibility. I don't know what that. I don't know.
Oh, you just wanted to save it. Just go ahead and say, sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right, does this make sense, everybody, what we've done here? Okay. I'm going to hit cancel out of that. So I've got this. So We're now going to make a copy of this layer, and we're going to make a copy the way you normally have done copies for layers before. You can do the Command J thing, or you can simply grab the layer and you can drag it down to the other little icon that's down at the bottom, and it'll make another copy of the layer, right? So then I want everybody to, it doesn't matter which one of these you click on, double click on the one that we just did. If you double click on this, I'm going to drag the exposure slider all the way down and say OK. And you can see both of my layers go really dark. That's not what I want to have happen in here. What I want to do is I want to reprocess this file for lighter parts, reprocess it for darker parts. I want to do my dodging and burning on raw data. I don't want to do it during, this files are in effect baked right now. Yes?
How did you get to that? Did you duplicate?
I just know, so I duplicated the layer, so Command J to duplicate the layer, double click on either one of them. In Camera Raw, just slide your exposure slider all the way down and say OK. And it happens to both of them. That's not helping me. What I want to do is reprocess the castle by itself, and I want to reprocess the sky by itself as well. Make sense? So if you've done all this, hit Command Z to undo it. Throw away the top layer, the one we just made, because again, that is a reference to the one underneath it. That is not an independent copy of my raw data. I need an independent copy of it, and there's only one way to get that. And if you take away nothing else, this is what you need to take away, and I'll know who was awake and who wasn't at this point, because you're going to actually have, this is also not only part of your homework here, there's another file that you need to do this to in your homework. So the way you do a separate version of this, a second version of your raw data, is you come up to the Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, down to New Smart Object via Copy. So everybody look up at my screen here, Layer, Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy, and let go. Now it's going to look identical. It's not going to look like we did anything different, but trust me, it's completely different. It is not a clone of the one underneath it. It is completely divorced from it on its own. Make sense? Okay. Double click on the top one, and we're going to put in a new set of values. So I'm going to select across the color temperature again, and for the, we're going to do this for the sky. So double click on color temperature and type in 4700, 4700. Hit the tab key. You can leave tint at 7. Hit the tab key for exposure. Crank it down to a -1.5, -1.5. Hit the tab key for recovery. Take it to 96. Hit the tab key for fill. Keep it at, or take it to 0. Hit the tab key for the blacks, we're going to take to 32. Hit the tab key for the brightness, we're going to go to 60. Hit the tab key for the contrast, we're going to go to 6. Hit the tab key for clarity, 100. Hit the tab key for vibrance, 0. Tab key, saturation, 0. So real quick, one more time, at your color temperature, 4700, the tint, 7, the exposure, -1.5. The recovery, 96, the fill light, 0, the blacks, 32, the brightness, 60, the contrast, 6, the clarity, 100, the vibrance, 0, and the saturation, 0. And you can see, looking at this, well, that makes for a really dramatic sky, but everything else is all fucked up in here. That's the whole point. So go ahead and say OK to this. And you will now notice that it all looks all that bad right here, but you'll notice that I developed the first file, the first layer that I did. If you turn off the eyeball on the top one, the one that we just did, you can actually see I developed this one for the grass. This is all just for the grass and the wood, that kind of stuff. It's not for the castle, it's not for the sky. The one that we just hit right here is for the sky. So now I need to put the two together. That's what I want to do, right? So I'm going to simply mask out the sky so that my sky layer only shows the mask. So how do you guys make selections in this class? Well, there's so many selection tools right now, but if you've been doing this for any length of time, whatever, usually everybody's go-to really quickly is quick selection tool. It's just the easiest one to hit, right? So that's the one we're going to actually start with. So to get to the quick selection tool, over to the tool palette on the far left-hand side, come down. It's actually the fourth tool down, If you click on it, you'll get a drop down. So simply click on it, you'll get a flyout menu, and in the flyout menu you'll have object selection tool, quick selection tool, and magic wand. We will talk about what the others are, but for right now, simply click on the quick selection tool. Come over onto your screen, and now your quick selection tool functions like a brush. So people are used to changing brush sizes in a myriad of different ways. I'm just going to tell you the way I do it. It's fast. It's a keyboard shortcut. If you take a look at the P key on your keyboard, just to the right of it are the square bracket keys. The key that's immediately next to the P key makes your brush smaller. The key that's to the right of that, the closed bracket key, makes it larger. So I'm simply going to click on mine to make mine a little bit larger. I'm going to double click on the hand just to get my image big, the way I like my image to actually be. And then I've got to select, again, the quick selection tool again to actually do that. So now I'm going to actually use the quick selection tool, and a lot of people are not really familiar with the best way this thing works, but what the quick selection tool does is this. It looks at the area that's right underneath it, and it tries to find, it looks out away from the area that's right underneath your quick selection tool and tries to find an edge. And so your job is to help it find that edge. Now, if we look at this image right now, I'm trying to find the horizon line, and right now the way I've processed this, I've really brought the sky down and made it considerably darker. It's getting really close in tone to the ground. To find that edge is a lot of work for Photoshop. But if I turn off the sky layer and do the work on the original layer, this line couldn't be easier to find. Right? The sky is blown out and the background is processed correctly, so this is a much easier way for the tool to do the job it wants to do. So don't just assume. You guys need to go in with the knowledge of how does this tool work, and then try to make it as easy as you can for this tool. There are people who will put curves on their image to really amp up the contrast, to bring out the edge, make their selection, throw the curve away, and you're off to the races. Right? So, the other trick about this is that you never want this tool to touch the line you want it to find. I want it to find this horizon line. I'm going to start up here in the top left-hand corner. As I start to work my way down, it's finding this line pretty good, but if I cross this line, it's going to start looking for an edge in the field. So you never let this tool touch the edge you want it to find. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. I'm going to click on the top, I'm going to click, and I'm just going to start to drag over. And it uses its own sort of built-in AI. It's got a predictive thing that's in it that actually allows me to find what this whole edge actually is. Does this make sense to everyone? We good on this part? How many of you guys save your selections? You try? It's so hard. Come up to the Select menu and come down to Save Selection, and we're going to call this Sky. And say OK. And then hit Command-D to deselect it. It's gone, but I want it back, and God knows it took me hours to build that selection. All you need to do is come back up to the Select menu, down to Load Selection, and click on the drop-down menu, and pick Sky, and say OK. You can save your selections, and we will save all of our selections in this class, because we will actually have selections that interact with other selections and all that kind of stuff. So this is the way you want to work on this. Make sense? With an active selection going, if you add a layer mask, it will actually mask your selection the way you've got it set up. So make sure that your top layer, your sky layer, is turned on. It is active. You know this is active because the background of this layer is slightly lighter than everybody else. And at the very bottom, there is a white rectangle with a circle in the middle of it. That is the Add Layer Mask icon. Simply click on it. We have now combined two different processes of our raw data. And those two different processes are both, with all of their changes, are maintained in this Photoshop file. So if you do this kind of work in Lightroom, you only get one version of how you've processed your raw data. You don't get multiple versions of it. Look at this. If you double-click on the smart object that is the sky, you'll go in and you'll see, okay, I've got that set up to the 4700 color temperature and the -1.5 stop. Hit cancel out of that, and then double click on the original one, the one that's down at the bottom. That's got its own whole set of parameters that you used to develop this raw data. You now have 2 copies of your raw data that are processed 2 different ways, and this stays with you forever. You save this file, it doesn't go away, it's there forever. Part of you right now should be jumping up, down, down, inside. This is fucking so next level. This is when you go in for the job interview for the retouching job and they say $9 an hour and you say, not for me. And they say, why? You got your head up your ass, you said, well, you know, show me something, impress me. Whip this out. Make a color profile for them first of their camera sensor and then whip this out. Okay, sorry, I was wrong. I'll pay you $9.50 an hour. No. Okay, we've got one last one to go, and we've got no time to do it. Let's do it anyway really quickly. Really fast, turn off the top layer, zoom in. I use the keyboard shortcut to zoom in. I simply hold down the space bar and the command, and it will temporarily, no matter what tool you have selected, it will give you the magnifying glass. If you add the option key to that, it's the negative magnifying glass, but it's a quick way to zoom in. Use the bracket keys to make your brush smaller. And remember, we're trying to select the castle. You do not want to touch anything else in here. You don't want it to touch any of the edges. So simply click and start to drag across. Temporarily then to move the image, because I've zoomed in, simply hold down the space bar and you will temporarily get the hand, and you can finish doing the selection of the castle. I've got a lot of the ground now that is selected. To get rid of that, still using the tool, I'm going to zoom back out just a little bit. Hold down the option key and you will get the negative for the quick selection tool. Again, you want to run close to the edge underneath the castle, but you do not want to touch that edge. It's the same trick. You're simply trying to give Photoshop a better way of sort of like figuring this out.
What did you put it back?
So to do what? Oh, just the option key. It's just like any of the selection tools. The option key gives you the negative part. Okay.
Oh, so it's just, oh, okay.
Got it? Okay, I'm going to save this selection because we're going to use it in a second. So I'm going to go to the select menu, the drop down menu to save selection. I'm going to call it Castle. And so, okay. Then I'm going to turn on my sky layer. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I'm going to click on my sky layer because I need to make another copy of this. Up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, over to New Smart Object via Copy. It's going to have that sky mask on it. I'm simply going to throw the sky mask away because I really need just the castle on this. I'm going to double click on this file now to go back into Camera Raw, and this is the last set of processings that I'll give you.
I'm a little lost. The guy got lost.
Okay, wait, no, I'm rushing because we're close. So, let's go back to the beginning. Do you have the castle selection made, and did you save that selection?
No, my tool isn't working. It's just giving me a hand.
It's, so you've selected the quick selection tool from the menu up at the top, and no, you're all right.
It's just giving me a hand.
Make sure, hit Command D to make sure you have no selection going. Then go up and select the quick selection tool one more time. I don't think that's the quick selection tool. Click on the drop-down menu. Let me see what you kick out on. All right. Oh, make sure that you're on this layer. So turn the layer on. You have to be able to see it. And then also you need to select the image part, not the mask part. And now you should have the quick selection tool. Oh, so this is a perfect example. The quick selection tool is not showing up. It's only the hand tool, only the hand tool, only the hand tool. What would you guys do? How do you fix this?
Try to find out all the selections.
You have to reset your preferences. So all of the work that we did last week, you're going to lose, except you saved a copy of all your preference files, and all you need to do is replace that in the user library, right? hang tight. I'm going to get through everybody else, and you and I will get to that as soon as everybody else splits. Yes?
I'm like being a perfectionist right now.
Okay.
It's like not getting the book.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about that part. No, because we're going to refine edge next week.
Cool.
Okay? All right. Hold tight on this, just watch, and then we'll fix it at the very end, and we'll get you up and going again. Is everybody else okay, though, on this? We saved the castle? Okay. So really quickly, I am now going to select my top layer that is the sky. I've got it turned on. Are we good on this? Hit Command, don't hit Command J. Hit up to the layer menu. Again, we need to make another copy of this, but it has to be not a clone of what we've done, but a completely independent copy, another copy, a third copy of our raw data. Up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, over to New Smart Object via Copy. It will create a new copy of that. It'll look, but it also creates the mask for it as well. I don't want this mask. I'm going to reprocess this file to be just the castle, right? So I'm going to click on the mask and then simply drag it down to the trash, and it just gets rid of it. And I'm good to go. Is everybody good on this part? Yes.
I can't see my masks anymore.
Did you throw it away? Because that's the idea. Oh, you can't see. Yeah, you threw away the wrong mask. But that's okay. Hit Command D to deselect. Go over to your select menu, down to load selection. The drop-down menu right here, go to, doesn't look like you saved your sky.
I did. Well, I did. I swear.
No, I swear, I believe you. I believe you. That's okay. Stay with me on this. Let's just go ahead and do this one because you don't have the one for the custom made either. But just do the rest of do the processing, and then you and I will go in at the, when everybody splits whatever and fix and load your layer, load your selections. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. Just watch the video. Not right now. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so my final one, I've got the very top one selected. Double click on it to go back into Camera Raw. This is going to be my third version. Select the color temperature and put in 6800. Hit the tab key. 7 for the tint is fine. Hit the tab key for the for the exposure. -1.5 is fine. Hit the tab key for the recovery. 52. Hit the tab key for fill light, 27. Hit the tab key for the blacks, 16. Hit the tab key for the brightness, 91. Tab key for the contrast, 68. Tab key for clarity, 100. Oops. Tab key, 0 vibrance and 0 saturation. So again, 6800 for your color temperature, -1.5 for the exposure, 52 for the recovery, 27 for the fill light, 16 for the blacks, 91 for the brightness, 68 for the contrast, and 100 for your clarity. Everybody else is 0. And say OK. So now in my case, I've actually already built the mask for my castle. Again, I'm going to double click on the hand to zoom all the way back out. I'm going to come up to my select menu, down to load selection, click on my drop-down menu and come down to Castle and say OK. And then because this layer is selected and I have an active selection going, I click on the little square with a dot in the middle, the circle in the middle, to add a layer mask. This is now 3 different processings of my raw data. Try to do that with a curve. Try to do that with a soft light layer. Impossible. Impossible. You can try. You can actually, I would save this file, this is your homework, but turn this off, throw a curve on there and try and make that sky that dark. Won't happen. Questions? All right, you guys have gone above and beyond. You hung in here for another 8 minutes. Thanks. If you got lost, save your file because you got the majority of it done. Watch the video, the last part of it, and you'll be good to go. Okay? Okay.